Now, hybrid cloud has really emerged as a backbone of enterprise AI, enabling dynamic workloads, real-time data processing, and seamless integration across public and private environments. Today, we're taking a closer look at hybrid cloud and AI to understand how one is truly driving the other. You're going to find out today why AI success depends on hybrid cloud strategy and how you'll benefit as a result. Telarus VP of Cloud Kobe Phillips presents today's HITT training, joined by Rich Eitri, Chief Innovation Officer at Managed and Technology Solutions Provider ECI, along with Jason Wiley, who is Director of Channel and Alliances at ECI. Kobe, Rich, Justin, welcome to all three of you. Glad to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks, Doug.
If you guys couldn't tell by the headshot, Justin's definitely from the East Coast. So I appreciate you guys joining. Rich, Justin, for those that everybody on the call that hasn't heard of ECI, Rich, Justin, if you guys just want to kind of give a minute overview of all the different things that you guys can touch, and we'll dive into today's topic. But you guys have really come into the portfolio very strong with a couple of massive wins, and you can touch a lot of different pieces of the technology space. Do you mind just giving a little background for everybody on the call?
Sure. So for those of you not familiar with ECI, we've been in business now for about 30 years. We have three kind of pillars to our solution set. We are a traditional MSP, from help desk services down to core infrastructure, networking, and cloud. We're an MSSP, so we have our full cybersecurity practice with well over 400 cyber clients and proprietary technology that we've built in our MSSP business. And then we have our data and AI team, which has really evolved over the last 2 years. We did a lot of custom app dev in that group over a number of years, but given the momentum around AI, we really staffed up and we're able to provide full services around data and AI solutions, which is timely, right? We'll speak about quite a bit, today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you guys, like I said, have come in. We've had some nice wins with you guys already, and a good amount of growth. And a lot of it's been around that conversation of data and data readiness, AI centric conversations that we've really put you guys into. And, Rich, if you could just highlight some of the methodology and approach that ECI takes to your approach to an organization when they're coming and going, hey, we're interested in AI, or we want to get into AI. How does ECI come in to make an impact in that conversation?
Look, it really starts with me. There are a few hurdles, right, that I think every organization looks at when they start to want to address the AI strategy, right? And it's more around, everyone thinks they need to either have their data in like this pristine order before they can get started. They need to have this fully thought out strategy around AI. And those tend to be stumbling blocks, right? Like, to do those types of things, right? Like, look, being a CTO, former CTO, so I spent my career as a CTO before joining ECI, ran enterprise organizations. And I can tell you, getting your data in order is kind of like, getting your house 100%. Like, it's never going to happen, right? You're always going to have something you want to do in your house. So if you're waiting for that moment when your data is perfect, it's probably not going to happen. Right. The other piece is like defining a strategy around something like AI is super challenging. Like, the environment changes so quick. There's a lot of innovation coming out, on a regular basis. And what we try and do with clients is, whittle things down a little bit and say, hey, look, you need to get something off the ground. These tools are powerful. They can enable your organization. Let's start with like developing a strategy around security and compliance, right? To me, when you can frame out your guardrails around what's acceptable and what's not, right, from how you're going to use your data, how you use certain tools like within the organization, that begins to frame the basis for your strategy. Right. And then the next piece is we really help clients identify what's an MVP, right? So a minimally viable product, get something off the ground quick, right? That kind of sits within those guardrails, right? But that shows value to the organization. Because like any new technology, you really want to build consensus, right, in the company around, using this technology and enabling it. And once we begin to work with clients around kind of understanding some of their business problems, helping them develop these guardrails, usually we land in a place where the data is already in pretty good shape, we could do some cleansing along the way, and we could deliver a solid MVP that adds value. Now we can begin to kind of cast a broader strategy and start kind of implementing some AI tooling more broadly across the organization. And, like Kobe, this applies to kind of any tool that you're going to use, right? So we work with clients that want to enable Copilot across their organization, to wanting to develop custom solutions that maybe they run off their own GPUs or they're running off Azure or AWS. But, this is a standard kind of framework that to me is universal, in particular around, AI. Because I think even something simple like turning on Copilot requires the things that I just said, right? Or else you're going to turn on the tool and you're not going to get the value out of it that you sought. You're going to have security and compliance issues, right? As well as Microsoft frames it. There are things you need to configure, out of the gate, and things you need to think about around data. So
yeah, it's kind of like buying a Lamborghini, but never going above 60 miles an hour, right? You limit yourself based on not the capability of the engine, but the driver, if you will, if that's the comfort level, and the driver being the data in that scenario. I also love the house scenario that you had mentioned. The opportunity for advisors, and if you're setting on a call, one of the things that I want you guys to key into is this. Every conversation that we're having right here is a methodology and roadmap that leads to about 5 to 7 projects coming out of that, which then leads to monetization, products, et cetera. And as we go through this conversation, I would like you guys to kind of think through the organizations that are feeling a lot of pressure on AI, that you've had any kind of conversations with around road mapping, or ones that you could target. It's across every vertical, and it's across, I would say, target audience, mid-market and above, but is going to be a really good strong point, because those are going to have enough infrastructure to make a dent as far as what they need to do. And anyone that's been in business 15 plus years are going to have some data problems as far as having that stuff organized in a manner that can be utilized for this technology that's come up. What we're seeing, guys, is, to kind of go off of Rich's like house analogy, is we've been in a spot where our house maybe needs to get cleaned up a little bit, but we haven't had the ambition to go and do it. But now we're having house guests come over, and we need to get some stuff aligned, and we need to get it going, because nobody wants to have a dirty house when they have somebody come and visit them. And that hour and a half that you spend cleaning a house is the most efficient hour and a half that you're going to have in that entire span of time. And what we're seeing is that's what's happened with IT organizations and leaders, is AI has really cultivated a need to go and clean up their data and do these projects and stuff that they've been kind of pressing off to the side, where they're like, we'll get to it when we get to it. Rich, are you seeing the same thing, where like that's no longer an option? Even if it's getting some stuff in order right away, they're having to show some kind of value and return back on this technology frenzy organizationally.
Yeah. Look, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. I feel old, and I've never seen a technology get so much buy-in from the C-level and the business. And that's an interesting dynamic, because when the senior, usually as IT professionals, you have to kind of go in and sell the message around innovation, like why it's important to your organization, how it aligns with the business. But in this case, there's a lot of business leaders saying, hey, I have an idea. I think this could be helpful here. And they might know that like all the data isn't in order, or it's not timely, or all those types of things. But they're saying, like, go fix that. I want to get this thing, implemented. And AI actually helps solve some of the data problems. Like, a really good example, PDFs historically were generally challenging to get at, but everyone uses them, right? And when I say get at, I mean they contain tons of information, but reading them, parsing them, taking this unstructured data, putting it into structured data sets were very challenging, right? Now you can do that pretty easily. Right. So think about all of these businesses that many of, the people on the call today deal with around, getting PDFs, sending PDFs, having to summarize content in PDFs, right? And store data into databases that are in PDFs. Like, AI is a really good use case for that. And you don't need to have data in order to do that, right? We had, a client on the manufacturing side that, gets maybe a dozen, PDFs a day, has to summarize them, enter data into a system, and then send emails back out to, other people in the organization. And when that person goes on vacation, right, that process comes to, a screeching halt. AI was a perfect tool for that. Easy to develop, works out of the gate. We even customized the emails to sound, like the individual who was sending them out. And now that process runs irrespective of whether or not that person is at, their desk, and they're focusing on other things, right? And that data, didn't have to be cleansed and stored in a database. It was information that was hitting their inbox every day. So I think when you think about AI and some of the efficiencies that can be gained, people need to think about it in terms of what are the manual processes in my organization, and where's that data coming from, and do I even have that data mastered today? I think those are important things to think through.
Well, and I think we're getting an assist too, right? There's a technology buzzword that is going to rival that of, I think everybody on this call probably got tired of hearing digital transformation over the last few years, but it was relevant. And that's really how we would connect in and go, what's your digital transformation plan? And what's this? Agentic AI is about to take that space and to kind of give a brief overview of that for everybody on the phone. Agentic AI will be a buzzword. It will be talked about. It's going to be an endpoint to a lot of these companies' AI roadmaps. And essentially what it does is it takes everything Rich just laid out, where we do a lot of prompting, a lot of training on modules and stuff like that. And think of it of having an employee that's really good at taking tasks and doing it, but they have zero ambition to go and do anything on their own or create anything outside of that. Agentic AI brings every component of AI, predictive, conversational, and generative AI into the fold, and creates a proactive approach to AI in a lot of ways that can go in and be trained to go and do things on your behalf. And that's already been available, but this is really, as this thing takes off, all that, it's going to go from that chat GPT pressure of give me an internal intranet chat functions to, I need to get to an agentic AI state. And the roadmap from point A to point B has a lot of twists and turns for a lot of organizations in it, and their security, compliance, and everything in there too. Rich, are you already feeling some of that buzz come out as far as customers and needing that future, or trying to get to that future state without any kind of ability to be prepared for it right now?
Yeah, it's really amazing how, a year and a half ago, people were talking about AI, and, the use cases more around summarization and kind of really boring task efficiency, summarizing emails, content, board decks, things like that. Now, the conversation really is now about how can I get AI to do things for me, right? So it's taking data, turning it into information that you can take action on, right? And I think that's oftentimes a little bit of a misnomer around, data in and of itself is valuable, but turning data into information that you can take action on is really where the rubber meets the road. And we have a lot of clients now, look, summarization is fine, but they want to take it to the next level, right? And developing agents that are very specific to tasks in their organization, and then being able to chain those together, right, for different workflows. So for instance, the example I gave you around the PDFs and the email, well, there was an agent, right, that sat there to listen for the emails and knew which emails to look for. There's an agent that knew how to read those PDFs and were trained to read charts and tables that were embedded in those PDFs, right? Then there was an agent that was trained to summarize, the wording, and then there was an agent that was trained to summarize all of the charts and the images, right? And then there was an agent that brought it all together, and then an agent to send it out. And it sounds like a lot of work, but a project like that takes, several weeks to do and to build. But think about the automation that was there, right? And it is that story around, it took data, raw, that was in PDFs. It actually converted it into information, and then was able to send it out to people who needed it, right? So it took action, right? It actually did something versus just, sending some of the, summarization. And there's a lot of this kind of agentic, platforms now that are really kind of crossing over with RPA, right? So RPA was a big digital transformation, buzzword, and you saw a lot of people implementing, RPA platforms. AI really takes it to the next level, right? And really allows you to kind of, hyperscale automation in your organization.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff can get pretty into the weeds and pretty overwhelming for advisors. And as an advisor, if you're feeling overwhelmed, your clients are too, right? There is a translation. I've seen it in my time here over the last decade of our advisors usually under credit or don't give themselves enough credit how much they actually know and hear and can execute on. And they'll sit down in a meeting with, a VP or a C-level, CIO, CTO, et cetera, and thinking those guys are going to, have this overwhelming knowledge of this stuff. And they really don't either. That's why there's such an advantage to coming in and giving a roadmap or methodology. And Rich, what I'm hearing from you is like, you don't have to have a finished product set of data readiness and cleansing. It needs to be on the roadmap, and it's definitely an important state. But to get going, you can bring the data as it's ready into this environment with ECI, and you guys can create value based around what's already there for the client. And I think that's got to be a little bit of a relief for an advisor to go, hey, I can go into an organization and go, we have an idea of how you can start to get, you called it an MVP earlier, minimum viable product of value right off the bat. It's going to be met with security and compliance needs. And then we just start figuring out what the outcome is. What we just talked about, that agentic AI, think about a healthcare organization. If you can bring, technology in that's going to summarize charts, give all of this stuff, give the scheduling, do the insurance and coordination, all of those things built and trained on, which is available to do, that allows a doctor to see 2 to 3 to 4 more patients a day. And then as a business, that adds more profitability to the bottom line. As a society, that allows more people to get seen for healthcare reasons, right? So both of those are force multipliers of goodness. And then you take that across the board, and this should enable the valuable parts of each organization to free up more time. And that's one of the major conversations that we start to talk about. Our consultants are going to go, our advisors are going to go from technology experts to really, this is helping them become efficiency experts in business and giving back more time and bottom line. So you're going to see ROI in multiple different ways. What are some of the more recent examples you guys have seen, or some of the more fun ones that you could bring up to the audience of like that you've seen make a big impact like that had soft value that added a lot to the bottom line as well?
We work a lot in, financial services, and they invest a lot in technology. And people would often think that, is there really a lot of white space for efficiency? And there's tons, right? Like we built recently what we called a broker research agent, which, a lot of these traders in the morning get tons of PDFs from various brokers around research and content, different reports, right? Some of it could be in email, some of it could be in PDFs. And then they have their own internal models as well that they're running. And we were able to help them basically consolidate that information they're getting every day, right? Look at their internal data that's sitting in Excel and maybe other third-party market data sources, and produce canned reports that they specified. Hey, these are the 12 things we want to look at. Here's how we want to compare them. And we do that in like a minute versus an analyst coming in the morning, spending an hour to an hour and a half, gathering all of that data, summarizing it, and getting it over to the traders before the market opens, right? And look, everyone's been watching the stock market lately. You see how volatile it is. You don't think picking up an hour and a half in the morning is huge for them? Massive, right? Like now they can focus on, what am I going to do when the market opens versus, okay, here's the summary. Oh, now the market's open. Oh, shoot, what am I going to do, right? Type of thing. And I think like that, the amount of money and like that saved, like that organization has been tremendous, right? And to develop something like that, sure, it took time because of some of the various different content, but the ROI has been at least 10x, if not more, than what we developed. I think one other thing that we've tried to do, Kobe, to remove some of the complexity to this is, having done several projects, we saw that the framework we were building was pretty common, right? And especially within the Microsoft stack. So we actually codified that. So we could deploy a standard framework using Microsoft Fabric, using Azure AI Foundry, and like links into Microsoft PureView from a security and compliance perspective. And we can come to the table with that, right? Something that we built. And now we have like a number of POCs within our AI library that we can help deploy as starting points for clients to really like accelerate that kind of development piece, because it is a very iterative process, right? Like sometimes you start out maybe with just one use case around maybe patient records or other things. And then you quickly see, well, this is helpful, but if I did something over here, that would really like, add some level of efficiency, right? And the key thing I think around, it's not just the security and compliance and the MVP, but it's about being able to pivot quickly too, and having use cases to start from, because people sometimes need ideas to get things going.
Well, and I mean, we have some questions, and we'll definitely address those before we wrap up the segment around like how can AI impact like service industries and things like that. There's going to be multiple areas of it that I see. And going into anybody that has a sales organization, this is going to revolutionize like research, collection of notes, setting next appointments, writing follow-up emails, all of those things that, let's face it, that salespeople go, I don't really love doing that. It'll do a lot of that for you. And then it can even, depending on like the organization and their sales methodology, like say they have challenger sell or a different type of methodology, it can actually take notes from like a Zoom call like this and then give back feedback and go, hey, this is, here's some coaching. Here are some things you missed. Here's what you could cover next. And so it's going to do a lot of things around research and propensity to make the next move, either that's buy or sell, and give guided roadmaps to, even like in the service industry, you got plumbers and things out there like that to try to hit on this question in the chat. You have the ability to go out and go, hey, if you fix this, you might want to suggest this as the next stage and let them know that there's end of life coming on this product. It gives the intelligence and analytics back to the field, representative of that organization to potentially grow in the sales arena on top of like getting ahead and doing maintenance work for the homeowner. That's one thing. And then in the commercial space, it expands past that into additional blueprints. There is not really a boundary of options here of examples. And that's the fun and the scary part for a lot of organizations of how do I actually like put it into place and make it efficient across the board, right?
Yeah.
And, Rich, the topic here is how is it making an impact on hybrid cloud? This stuff has to run somewhere. And a company can either go and invest in building it out on their own infrastructure and paying for the GPUs and all of that stuff. And a lot of organizations will attempt that. I have a prediction that the ones that'll do that, or the ones that are still wanting to kind of run their own data centers, they'll abandon that sooner than later, just because space and cost prohibitive over time.
Yeah.
But what are you seeing as far as the impact on the relationships with AWS, Azure, Google? You had mentioned some of the, I call them blueprints that you guys have built out on some of the verticals, healthcare. Here's how you can implement AI. We're seeing that across a lot of those as well. Are you guys implementing any of those or helping organizations dip into those LLMs as they are available?
Yeah, so that's one of the key things about when you think about building, your AI kind of platform, building it on your own infrastructure, you lose a level of like innovation, right? And like platforms like Microsoft, like AI Foundry, you could run any model in AI Foundry. Like we have test cases where we run DeepSeek, right? We download our own version and it runs within AI Foundry, right? You could run Grok, all of the latest models that come out, you can run within AI Foundry, right? Same thing with Bedrock. You could run most on AWS Bedrock. You can run most of these, models. So you're not constrained around like what you can do, in the cloud. I think Microsoft in particular has done an excellent job in building out their AI platform. And when connected with Fabric, you can connect to any data source. And, most clients are running Microsoft 365. When you live in that ecosystem and you've built security and compliance around that, all of this inherits that security and compliance that you've already implemented. So it's a very synergistic solution in that regard, right? And I think for me, that allows you to get off the ground quickly and continue to stay innovative, right? And pivot and run. If you're going to run that stuff off your own GPUs, it's going to be challenging, right? Where I think hybrid cloud comes into play is, look, you could still have your data running off your own infrastructure, but you could create that secure bridge, right, and connectivity into the cloud so you could run the technology against your data without having to move it over the wire and create any additional security concerns. right? I think these platforms are so flexible now, and the ability to integrate data exists that that scenario is one that we see quite a bit of. Like, we have clients say, hey, I have an on-prem file server, or I have this legacy ERP, or this platform, I'm not ready to move it, but it has some really valuable data. How can I get that information out? And we work with them around different solutions, right? Whether it's API integration, direct database integration, or like scheduling a job to run a bunch of PDFs that you then use AI to read. Like, there's ways to get at that information and create value from it through AI.
Yeah, I would say the interesting thing that you just kind of laid out is, again, the complexity. I almost wanted to make a joke, but I didn't think the sarcasm might not land with everyone. I was like, oh, it's super easy, right? Again, going back to what the advantage is for our advisors is, this is going to be, it seems easy. You can have it do the coding. You can have it do, like, AI will do a lot of the infrastructure, like queue up, but putting it into an organization, implementing it, managing going forward, putting security, compliance around it, there's some complexity there that's going to be difficult for organizations to do internally. Similar to like the companies that wanted to move to the cloud and struggled and then move back. That will always be the advantage and the opportunity for our advisors, is bringing in organizations like ECI to be able to come in and operate on behalf of those clients and do that as a service. There's endless upside to this conversation, because, guys, what I want you to recognize is the AI conversation really is a fishing lure into everything else. And that agentic AI conversation, you'll see this be a bridge between what we've been the channel kind of labeled as CX AI and cloud AI, right? Conversational predictive AI on the CX side, which has been available for a number of years. And then Gen AI, which has really been driving this explosion in the last couple of years around Chat GPT and others. It's bringing it all together. It's not simple. It's not overly easy to then implement and put in. It does run, but go ahead, Rich. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think one thing that's important to your advisors, Kobe, and you brought up that point around, there's a journey here, right? And Microsoft, acknowledges that as well. So when we work with clients, especially around the Microsoft stack, Microsoft gives incentives through the whole journey, right? From implementing the security and compliance, Microsoft has an incentive for that we're able to help clients fund. Integrating the data, Microsoft loves when you hook into their data platforms. There's an incentive for that. Microsoft wants you to use their AI tooling. There's incentive for that. So when you start to kind of look at the whole journey, and there's even sub things within there, right? So even if you're using like something like Microsoft Fabric, well, there's an incentive. But then if you stand up like a Synapses database, there's an incentive for that. And like, we work with Microsoft on some of these bigger projects to really understand how can we layer those incentives, right? And make sure that we're capitalizing on everything along that, journey, right? And, again, like, that's the total cost of the project that we're able to shrink. Everyone still gets paid on the broader, right, scope of the project. But now Microsoft is funding a portion of it, which helps get people off the ground, right? And I think, the cloud, we talked about cloud versus building on-prem. The other big thing is that, in cloud, this is OpEx versus CapEx, right? So you're not coming out of the gate with a big spend. You can get some real ROI by leveraging the cloud, some of these incentives, right? And really driving like some efficiencies in your organization.
Yeah, and speaking of ROI, one of the questions in the chat, and we'll kind of dive into those to make sure we get all those answered before our segment wraps up here. But what, you kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but what type of ROI for a client, in that first MVP have you seen be successful? Is there any, case study that you guys have that you point to with clients and go, hey, we've seen somebody else do this, and that usually is an easy win, so to speak?
Well, I don't know if could be, because we've crossed like a lot of verticals. The one thing I will say is that for the projects that we've done in the last 18 months, the ROI usually will calculate it for like a year, and the client has realized it in less than 6 months, right? So, the ROIs are fairly tangible, right? And, something that you can achieve, a lot quicker than you just outline, on paper, because the the inefficiency is usually a lot bigger than like people realize. And when they go back and look after this has been automated, they're like, wow, like it's saving a lot more time than we anticipated. I thought the ROI would be 4x. It's really 8, right? And being able to show that ROI faster, I think is valuable, right, in the journey, because it allows you to keep getting that, reinvest.
Yeah, and I've seen it kind of span across, again, anybody with a sales organization that responds to RFPs, breaking those down and responding within, an hour versus days, tying up organizations, even in like internal search, you get an employee going, hey, what's my healthcare, coverage options, where they would have to dig through that. It's not something that's used already. This is the easy example. It's there in seconds. It depends on, again, what data the organization has targeted to utilize to implement it. But we've seen it save a ton of time in HR departments, legal departments, especially sales efficiencies, et cetera. So the stated goal part of it is what's always interesting. When you challenge a customer and you go, what are you looking to target? A lot of customers are just more exploring it, and they don't have a stated goal. So you can help them kind of even craft are you looking to have 10% more efficiency, time back, et cetera? And I think that's probably why it's hard to nail down an exact, answer to that question, because it has varied project by project so much. But it's really focused around efficiency and time back has been the overwhelming response from every one of these that I've been a part of personally. On the data and the EHR, API access is one mechanism to access it. There's others as well that you can get around and put it in a more secure area that Rich, I don't know if you want to highlight on some of the way that you guys approach sensitive data materials like that.
So, typically what we'd like to do, especially when it's sensitive data, is understand like what the client is doing from a DLP perspective and how they align with the regulatory framework, whether it be, HIPAA, high trust, CMMC, SEC, FINRA, that type of stuff. If they're not doing it, we'll make some recommendations. Many of the clients we deal with have the Microsoft licensing for PureView, which is a great product. I'm a big proponent of it. And you can secure data, whether it's like sitting on a server or if it's in the cloud. So PureView works across, public and private infrastructure. And we would help the clients implement PureView to secure that data and align with that regulatory framework. Once that's done, then there's different methods, as I mentioned before, to get at that information. If they don't like API access for whatever reason, we can hit the database directly, or we can, code a script that runs a series of PDFs, right, that we can then read and ingest into the platform. So, there's, different methods, right? I would say, unless there's a real like stringent, reason why they wouldn't allow programmable access to that platform, there's a way to get around it.
I'm going to dive on a couple of these that I can answer directly. One that I don't want to misspeak on: SOC 2 certification and regulatory compliance. You guys are solid there. Bob, your question, essentially, if an agent recognizes a PDF sent to a person for summary, identifies and validates the summary versus what an agent would have summarized. So you're looking for like a validation, like comparison between two different platforms. I just want to make sure. If so, I believe, utilizing a number of different AI engines there would help.
We have some out of the box stuff based on like some of the work that, we've done. So.
Target audience on this, I think you can have a conversation with directors, but it's really going to be VP to C-level, because you're going to get into more on the business conversation, and you're changing a lot of the landscape, especially when you bring in automation to remove a manual process in. Those are going to be the guys that you're going to sell it to, and the director and his team are going to be the ones that carry it through. So the director might get you into that. If they're seeing a lot of inefficiencies, you can get a lot of detail from the directors and go, hey, what are some of the things that are driving your teams crazy, or some of the things in the organization that keep getting broken? And then you go have that conversation and go, we can fix that. Why don't you get me an audience with, the VP or C levels, and we'll jointly go in and pitch it. That becomes obviously a champion, and you go from there, is the way that I've seen it quite a bit. Google Workspaces for you guys. As far as, do you guys work with anything in the Google area?
We haven't done any AI projects for Google Workspaces. Our security solutions support it. We've used some of the Gemini models, but we haven't worked with Workspaces yet. Mainly Microsoft and AWS.
All right, I got a question. I'm gonna kick this one to Justin, just to make him talk and get him off mute for a second. All right, Justin, if we engage ECI, how do we price the opportunity of discovery and the entry MVP? I think that'll vary. The second part of the question is going to be when it grows and the incentives kick in, does Telarus agents, does the opportunity continue to grow with the agent that brought it in?
Absolutely, 100%. I'm glad you did this. Most people probably thought I was mute. And originally, Doug introduced me as Jason, which I think is a Telarus syndrome because everybody at Telarus is named Jason. So
yeah, we have a lot of Jasons. So
I thought about changing my name.
I apologize. I thought I said Justin. Sorry.
No worries. It's fine. Again, like everybody at ECI is Jason, so I fit right in. Yes, you get paid for the life cycle of the deal, and that's typically where I come into play. Like I said before everybody joined, Rich is the brains. I am the brawn. So feel free to leverage me to get access to him. He's a great guy.
All right, and then Justin, I'm going to hit you with one other one, just since we got you off mute. Hit us with the company website. We had a couple of people, and you already answered it in there. So is this the ECI.com, right?
Yep, ECI.com. So for some people may have known us in our previous life as Castle Integration. That's where we started 30 years ago. We made a couple acquisitions back at the end of 2019, early 2020. With those acquisitions, we basically rebranded as ECI, and now we're one company moving forward. So when you see these three little pillars of our castle, that's to represent the three companies coming together as one.
Yep, Tom, they are not the prison, as brought up in the chat. But guys, we are right up time for our segment. I hope the advisors found this valuable in understanding there are easier entry points to AI now than ever. The data cleansing and stuff definitely has to get done. That's going to be the big scope of work that comes into play, and these guys do an amazing job at it. On top of that, like they mentioned, full stack MSP, they can handle the cloud conversation really well. So ECI, thank you for joining us and highlighting some of your capabilities and where you guys are seeing the market at now and where it's going in the future. It's been really great.
Thank you for having us. It's been a great conversation as always.